But we want this Journeys podcast to really be about people's journeys. You know, we want to just talk to people, find out what they're doing, where they are, where they're, you know, what they hope for, and where they've come from. You know, when I look at my own journey and when I look at the people of the journeys of the people around me, it's rich with, you know, trauma, with anxiety, with joy, with difficulty. You know, they're interesting journeys. And ultimately, you know, I run a little recovery organization, and there's probably 10 or 15 of us that regularly get together in recovery. You know, and we've got all of society is represented there. You know, we've got business people, and we've got people that are struggling to establish themselves in their first home after treatment. We've got people who are, you know, up and down, still battling their demons and trying to find a way through, and they come when they can. And, you know, we're not advocates of any particular approach. What we say to people is find a way to initiate recovery, find a way to sustain it. Let us walk alongside you. Let us help you find a way to, you know, find your tribe, find your community. Because, you know, actually what we find is people in recovery are the opposite to the mainstream narrative around addiction, which is all about risk and stigma and shame and keep that person at arm's length. You know, recovery really is about seeing that person with a rich life experience who's got who can benefit the community, who's an asset, who's someone who's been through stuff. You know, if someone has been through deep waters and has come out the other side, you want that person around, because there's an element of you know, they're a survivor, and they know what it's like to go through deep waters, and we will all go through deep waters at some stage, and you need someone who's been through it. I remember reading years ago in a completely different context about Microsoft. They were hiring lots of bright people, and someone at Microsoft said, we need to hire some people that have been through difficulties. You know, they've been through buyouts, they've been made redundant, they've seen adversity, and they've come out the other side. Because we don't just want young, bright, super duper naive employees. We want people who have got a few scars, who know how to mix it up a little bit in terms of some resilience. And
well, I mean, look at it. Yeah, and look at it this way. Some of my heroes have always been mountaineers, and the things they've done to get off the mountain when they were, you know, touch the void, for example, and like guy crawls now with broken legs. They're heroes to us. So why can't these people be heroes? Now, the only way, to me, I mean, we did a lot of research on prejudice as well. And what we found in the early days is people were just as prejudiced against a recovering heroin addict than a heroin addict. Right. It's very different. When I say people, this study was students who would have thought would have been more open-minded, but they weren't. You know, we need to be celebrating the fact that people have overcome this. And the only way, well, not the only way, but one major way is to hear from them. When I started to hear what people had been through, and then just these little nuances, like people, all the emotions came flooding back when they were off the drug. And they had to learn new ways to deal with that. Or kids who were taking drugs at 12 years of age, their brain was still developing. They didn't know how to deal with emotion. I mean, Brad Meir Phillips describes this beautifully. You know, he was doing solvents at some ridiculously young age. He never learnt human interactions. He never learnt what emotions were about. Because drugs were always there. And for some kids, it's not the drugs, it's the fact that they're being abused or whatever.
It's escape to a better place, isn't it? You know,
so we need to understand where these people come from, and one way we can understand is listen to their voices. And to me, you know, storytelling versus, my old statistical stuff,
Yeah.
neuroscience, or even in the complicated stats that I did with human work.
Yeah.
Nah.
Yeah.
The stories are what to me impact. And and to see what someone has been through, and then to see them wanting to share that and helping other people.
Yeah.
Which of course strengthens their recovery, as you know. But at the same time, they don't have to do that.
Yeah.
And yet they do.
Yeah.
So when you see all of that, and you've got my psychological makeup, you're completely wrapped. You become passionate. There's no other way. I mean, I remember an old friend, because I was brought up in Australia and then came back 40 years later and met my old schoolmates. One of them said, "We always knew you would be like this." And I said, "I can't see how you could work that out, because you did not know me as a kid. I wanted to be a sports commentator."
Right.
But when you see the bravery and the courage that I've seen and you've seen.
You want to talk about it, you want to record it.
And I love story. I love my crime novels. I love good films. I would love to be a filmmaker.
Yeah.
But that's about story.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say the sports broadcasting is about, describing what's in front of you. And actually sport is a heroic pastime.
I hadn't thought about it. That's a good point.
It's,
maybe I'm just always was going to be a storyteller.
Yeah. And stories, when I describe Towards Recovery often as a small or insignificant organization, what I mean is we're not like the big boys. The big boys, the big organization can say we help 10,000 people a day, because they're so big and all the rest of it. And yes, there are lots of stories within what they do, but they focus on the statistics because the statistics give them funding. They can say to government, we do X, Y, and Z. Whereas all we've got is stories. All we've got is our journey, is our story of our own individual story and our collective stories. And I think those stories do have power. I listened to a podcast recently from Jordan Peterson, and he was talking about stories and games. And we, as a society, it just really made me think for a bit. As a society, we spend a lot of money telling stories. So when you look at the film industry, and whether that's in Hollywood or Bollywood or anywhere, films are stories. When we look at the gaming industry, games are essentially people moving through a storyline, or people facing adversity. And so there is something about us living and reliving and telling and retelling those stories. And actually, stories are powerful. We've talked before, when we had our little chat on Saturday, I told you about the guy that just sat with 6 or 7 people in recovery while he was still in active addiction and dipping in and out of treatment. And at the end of just one evening, sitting with a few people in recovery, he turned to me and said, "How do I get what they've got?" And I said to him, "I don't know. What are you prepared to do?" And 6 months on, that guy changed his life. He made some decisions to move out of the area and get some help. And several years on from that conversation now, he's got a flat, he's in a relationship, he's got a job. He made changes, but it started just by sitting in a group, not even talking, just listening to people in recovery, chatting in a cafe context. And that gave him the spark to change his life. And so we know our stories have power. We know that recovery is contagious. We just need to find ways to put people in recovery together and to get their stories out there. And if we do that, we know that someone somewhere will hear it and it will have an impact on them. Like the woman you mentioned, who would actually print it off and put it in her back pocket and carry it around with her, almost as a talisman of some sort.
There's a very, very well-known American native Indian who's worked in psychiatry. He was actually the youngest medical a person at Stanford University who'd started a medical degree. He's 14 years old, and that's Louis Melmadrona. And he's written a book about narrative and stories and the impact in psychiatry. There's a whole thing on that. And I've just pulled up here a blog I've written from his book, where he says, stories help us develop empathy, to see the world through someone else's eyes. Sorry, the ringing was that my friend Adam, who's in the book, just left quarantine and is approaching Sydney from the Northern Territory.
Oh, right. Wow.
Now he's almost home. I'm so excited. Anyway, stories give cognitive and emotional significance to experience. Stories enhance our creativity and help us beyond the here and now. Wow. Stories keep us connected in social networks which build and shape our brain. And stories unlock the mysteries of psychophysical suffering that declarative facts cannot reveal. Textbooks don't have the same impact.
What's that guy's name? What's that guy's name?
Lewis, Lewis, Mel, M for Michael, EHL dash Madrona, Louis Melmadrona. And his book is called Healing the Mind Through the Power of Story, the Promise of Narrative Psychiatry.